Lucas hadn't just bought a house, he had bought a dream. The house on 2302 Whispering Pines was a sprawling single-story rancher, but the real prize was the backyard, an untouched half-acre canvas of possibilities. His plan had been months, in the making, the culmination of a decade of saving and sacrifice. The centerpiece of that plan was a pool, not a cheap, flimsy, above-ground model, but an in-ground, cobalt blue masterpiece with a waterfall feature and a sun-soaked deck. It was a monument to his hard work, a private sanctuary he had always craved. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a brightly colored pastel pink note tucked into his mailbox. It wasn't a fine, just a friendly reminder. Welcome to the Whispering Pines community. As you settle in, please remember our commitment to harmonious living. All yard signage must be approved by the HOA Architectural Committee. Lucas had a small, handwritten, no soliciting sign on his front door. He scoffed, tearing the note into neat little pieces. He had bigger things to worry about, like the roar of the excavators and the geometric precision of the concrete mixers. A week later, the first official fine landed. $50. The violation: unapproved debris in the front-facing driveway. The debris was the neatly stacked pile of wood from his old deck, which he was using to build a small garden box. He had a receipt from the recycling center for the rest of the lumber. He called the HOA, a number he found on the community website. The voice on the other end was clipped, efficient, and devoid of warmth. Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, this is Carol Jenkins, President. How can I assist you? Hi, this is Lucas from 2302 Whispering Pines. I just got a fine for a pile of wood in my driveway. I'm building a planter box with it. It'll be gone by the end of the week. Mr. Davis, our guidelines clearly state that all materials must be stored out of sight from the street. The voice was a sterile, practiced monotone. The fine is valid. You have 7 days to rectify the violation and pay the fee. Rectify the... But it's a planter box, and it'll be a permanent fixture in my yard soon. It's not just random debris. The rule is the rule, Mr. Davis. I'm sure you received a full copy of our bylaws at closing. If not, you can find them on our website. Have a good day. She hung up before he could respond. A flicker of irritation became a burning ember. He paid the fine, but the incident left a sour taste in his mouth. He finished the planter box in a day and a half just to spite her. The rest of the summer was a blur of construction, the relentless Texas sun beating down on him as the pool took shape. He watched the massive hole in his yard become a perfectly sculpted basin, the rebar forming an intricate skeletal pattern. The day the concrete was poured, he felt a surge of triumph. The day the shimmering turquoise water filled it, he felt pure joy. It was more than a pool. It was the physical embodiment of his freedom. The second certified letter arrived 2 days after the final inspection. The crisp, white envelope felt heavy in his hands. He opened it in the kitchen, the sunlight from the sliding glass door glinting off the surface of the pool, now his own private ocean. His eyes scanned the document. The header was the same official HOA letterhead. The tone was still the same, cold, sterile, corporate voice. But the text made his blood run cold. Violation: failure to provide equitable access to a shared community amenity. Fine: $250 outer initial violation fee with a daily penalty of 50 hours. Additional action: mandatory suspension of property amenities until rectified. By law reference. Section 7, Article D, Subsection 2. All common recreational amenities, whether on private or communal property, shall be made available to all residents of the Whispering Pines community on a non-discriminatory, pre-scheduled basis. Lucas read the words 3 times, his brain struggling to process the sheer audacity. Shared, community, amenity, he whispered to himself. His pool. His pool. A pool he had paid for, built on his land, enclosed by his fence. A cold rage, unlike anything he had ever felt, began to simmer in his gut. He grabbed his keys and the letter, not even bothering to change out of his gym shorts. He was going to have it out with Carol Jenkins, face to face. Carol's house was a perfectly manicured fortress of a home just 2 streets over. The lawn was a flawless green carpet, the flower beds a perfectly symmetrical burst of color. When she opened the door, she was just as he had imagined her, a woman in her late 50s, with a severe blonde bob, a crisp polo shirt, and a look of permanent disapproval etched onto her face. "Mr. Davis, you received the letter, I see." She didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Carol, what in the hell is this?" Lucas's voice was low, laced with disbelief. He held up the letter. "Shared community amenity? This is my pool, on my property. I paid for it. This is insane." Carol's gaze didn't waver. "It's right there in the bylaws, Mr. Davis. Section 7, Article D, all recreational amenities. But that's for things like the tennis courts, the walking trails, the community pool you guys were supposed to build 2 years ago." "The wording is clear," she said, her voice a razor-thin line. "It states recreational amenities, whether on private or communal property. The association has determined that your pool, due to its size and scope, falls under that classification. It is a recreational amenity, and as such, must be shared." Lucas's jaw dropped. "You're telling me I have to open my private backyard to strangers, people I don't know, the whole neighborhood?" "We'll set up a scheduling system," she said, as if this was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "You can submit your open hours, and we'll coordinate access. It's for the greater good of the community, Mr. Davis." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He took a step back, the surreal nature of the conversation hitting him with full force. He could see his reflection in the perfect glass of her storm door. He looked like a madman. This has to be a joke," he stammered. "This is a clear overreach. It's a violation of my property rights." "The HOA is a private organization," Carol said, a glint of superiority in her eyes. "When you purchased your home here, you agreed to abide by our covenants and bylaws. We are simply enforcing what you agreed to." He walked away in a daze, the absurd conversation replaying in his mind. He wasn't just fighting a fine anymore. He was fighting for his peace, his privacy, his sanity. When he got home, he locked the back sliding door, a gesture that felt both pointless and desperately necessary. He looked out at the tranquil, beautiful water of his pool, now a source of immense anxiety. He had to do something. That night, unable to sleep, he logged on to the community website. He downloaded the full 150-page PDF of the HOA bylaws and started reading. He scoured every page, every section, every article. He read Section 7, Article D, Subsection 2 again and again, and found a small, almost invisible footnote he had missed before. The footnote referenced a past bylaw amendment, a clarification of the original wording. His heart began to pound. He scrolled back, searching for the amendment in the documents. He found it. The date was 2 years ago, and the language was a stark, brutal contrast to the fine she had just issued. He sat back in his chair, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an insane overreach. It was a lie. Carol Jenkins had issued the fine based on an outdated, superseded bylaw. The current one had a crucial, defining clause that changed everything. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, replaced his disbelief. He printed the amendment. It was his proof, his shield, his weapon. He looked out his window at her perfectly manicured lawn, her pristine house. He had been on the defensive, cornered, and afraid. But not anymore. Now he knew exactly how to fight back, and he was going to expose her. The glowing screen of his laptop felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Lucas stared at the text, at the date, January 2nd, 2023, and the clear, concise language of the amendment. Recreational amenities located on private property for the D. Sole and exclusive use of the homeowner are exempt from shared access requirements, provided the homeowner maintains adequate liability insurance. The words were a lifeline, a shout in the storm. The document was a smoking gun, and Carol Jenkins, with her perfectly manicured lawn and condescending smirk, had just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. A cold, deliberate rage replaced the hot, confused fury he'd felt earlier. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bureaucratic mix-up. This was a deliberate act of deception. She had lied to him, not just about the rules, but about the very nature of their community. He wasn't dealing with an overzealous bureaucrat. He was dealing with a tyrant who had twisted the very fabric of their agreement to exert her power. He printed the single page, the laser printer humming with a low, satisfying hum. The crisp paper was more than just proof. It was his declaration of war. He knew he couldn't go in blind. He needed to talk to someone else, to feel out the battlefield. He decided on the house 2 doors down. A charming little cottage with a garden full of wildflowers and a weathered porch swing. He had seen the woman who lived there, a kind-faced woman in her 60s with a shock of silver hair, waving at him as he came and went. Her name, he recalled from a community event flyer, was Eleanor. He walked the short distance, the printed amendment clutched in his hand. The air was thick and humid, the kind of Texas heat that felt like a physical weight. He rehearsed his words, the facts, the evidence. He rang the doorbell, and the chimes had a gentle, melodic sound that was the polar opposite of Carol's house. Eleanor opened the door, a warm, welcoming smile on her face. "Well, hello, Lucas. I haven't seen you much since your pool was finished. It looks beautiful, by the way." Lucas felt his shoulders relax slightly. "Thank you, Eleanor. That's actually why I'm here. I just got a fine from the HOA. For the pool." Eleanor's smile faltered, replaced by a look of weary recognition. "Ah, a fine. Let me guess, Carol. She says I have to share my pool with the whole neighborhood. That it's a community amenity." Eleanor sighed, her eyes full of sympathy. "Oh dear, she's at it again. Come on in, have a glass of iced tea." Lucas stepped into her home, a cozy space filled with books, paintings, and a subtle scent of potpourri. He felt a wave of relief. He wasn't alone. He explained the situation, showing her the initial letter and the fine. Eleanor's face hardened as she read it. "The nerve of that woman," she murmured, shaking her head. "She pulls this kind of stunt all the time. Back in '06, she tried to fine the Andersons for having a fountain that was too loud. It was a tiny little garden fountain. And the Petersons? They had a satellite dish that was a 1/4 inch too big. She found a bylaw from 1998 and threatened them with a lien. But the rule she's quoting—" "It's been amended," Lucas said, pulling out the printed page. "Look at this. The bylaw she's citing was changed 2 years ago. My pool is exempt." Eleanor took the paper, her eyes scanning the text. She looked up at Lucas, her expression a mix of awe and a kind of fierce pride. "Well, I'll be. You did your homework, didn't you? Most people just give up and pay. She knows that. She banks on it. She's the queen of legal intimidation. And she rules this association with an iron fist. It's what she wanted all along." "What she wanted?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She ran for president on a platform of restoring order and property values. Her husband left her a few years ago, and she became obsessed with control. This HOA is her entire kingdom now. She holds all the power, and anyone who challenges her is a threat. She's made a lot of enemies, but she's also built a small army of loyalists on the board. People who are either afraid of her or just like the idea of having power over their neighbors. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't a random act of a power-hungry woman. It was a calculated move, part of a larger, insidious pattern. She's not just a bully, he said softly. She's a fraud. And you, Lucas Davis, have the key to her downfall, Eleanor said, a slight, victorious smile gracing her lips. But you need to be careful. She's not going to just roll over. She'll fight you tooth and nail. He left Eleanor's house feeling both emboldened and wary. He had a plan, and he had an ally. It was time to go back to the fortress. He arrived at Carol's house a second time, the evening sun casting long, dramatic shadows across her pristine lawn. The light was golden and theatrical, and Lucas felt as if he were walking onto a stage. He rang the doorbell, the chimes sounding strangely muted this time. Carol opened the door, her face a mask of annoyance. "Mr. Davis, we have nothing further to discuss. The fine stands and the daily penalties have already begun. If you don't pay, we will be forced to place a lien on your property. And you'll be doing that based on an outdated, superseded bylaw," Lucas said, his voice steady and calm. He held up the document. Section 7, Article D, Subsection 2 was amended on January 2nd, 2023. This fine is invalid, and you know it. The mask of annoyance on Carol's face cracked for the first time. For a brief, fleeting moment, Lucas saw a flicker of raw, undisguised panic in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, searing fury that was 1,000 times more terrifying than her earlier disapproval. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dropping to a low hiss. "This is a clear attempt to shirk your responsibilities. I am the president of the HOA, and I am enforcing the rules." "The rules you fabricated," Lucas countered, taking a step closer. "The current bylaws explicitly state that my pool is exempt. You knowingly used a defunct rule to intimidate me, just like you've done to others." She lunged forward, her hand outstretched. "Give me that!" Lucas recoiled, pulling the paper back. "No! This is my proof, my evidence. The board is going to hear about this, and the whole neighborhood is going to know exactly what kind of leadership you've been providing." Carol's perfectly sculpted face twisted into a snarl of pure malice. "You think you can just waltz in here and threaten me? You're a new homeowner, Mr. Davis. You have no idea how things work around here. I didn't get to this position by being weak. That bylaw, the one you think you have, was never properly ratified. The copy on the website is a mistake, a clerical error." "That's a lie, and we both know it," Lucas said, his voice unwavering. "I have the original amendment right here. It's signed, dated, and legally binding. You are in violation of your own bylaws. You've committed fraud." "Fraud?" She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You're the one who is attempting to circumvent the rules, Mr. Davis. You're the one who is going to be in an untenable situation when the lien is placed on your property and you'll have to sell at a loss just to pay your fines. Then we'll see who the fraud is." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. A lien. He hadn't thought of that. The HOA had the power to do that, and she was going to use it. She was going to try and seize his home, the dream he had worked so hard to build, all over a private pool. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice was thin. "Am I?" she asked, a chilling smile spreading across her face. "You want to fight me, Mr. Davis? Go ahead. I've been running this show for 10 years. You're a one-man show with a piece of paper. I have the entire board, a legal team, and a mountain of bylaws that give me more power than you can possibly imagine. You think this is a fight about a pool? This is a fight for control, and I will not lose." She took a menacing step forward, her eyes blazing with a predatory hunger. "Go on, Mr. Davis. Run to the board. Tell them whatever you want. They're my friends. They're my allies. You're a nobody. You have no idea the war you've just started." And with that, she slammed the door in his face. The sound was a final, concussive punctuation mark. Lucas stood there on her porch, the paper still in his hand, the setting sun casting a long, defeated shadow. The dream he had bought was now a battlefield, his sanctuary a fortress under siege. He had found his enemy, but he had just learned. that she wasn't just a bully with a clipboard. She was a general, and he had just stepped into a war he never knew he was in. Lucas stood on the manicured lawn of his nemesis, the cool evening air doing nothing to soothe the burning humiliation in his veins. The slam of her door echoed in his mind, a final, definitive punctuation mark on her victory. A one-man show with a piece of paper. Her words were a venomous truth, dripping with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. She wasn't bluffing. The threat of a lien wasn't an idle one. It was a weapon she was ready to use. She was going to take his dream, his sanctuary, and use it as a tool to bleed him dry. He retreated to his own house, the perfect, beautiful house that now felt like a prison. He looked at the pool, the one thing he had fought for, and for the first time, it didn't look like a symbol of freedom. It looked like an expensive liability, a beacon of a problem he couldn't solve. He considered every terrible option. Paying the fine, selling the house, turning his private haven into a glorified public pool for people he didn't know. The thought was nauseating. He had come here for peace, for a quiet life, not a war. What if he just folded? What if he just accepted defeat and moved on? He had to be smarter than this. He was an architect, a problem solver. But this wasn't a blueprint. It was a battle. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a soft knock came at his front door. He opened it to find Eleanor, a thermos in one hand and a plate of homemade cookies in the other. Her eyes, filled with a gentle wisdom, immediately saw through his defeated facade. "I saw her slam the door on you," she said quietly, stepping inside. "And I saw the look on your face when you walked away. She got to you, didn't she?" Lucas just nodded, sinking onto his sofa. "She threatened a lien on my house. She said the bylaw I found was never properly ratified and that the board is on her side. She said this is a war for control and that I'm a nobody." Eleanor placed the cookies on the coffee table and poured him a mug of steaming chamomile tea. She's a master manipulator. She preys on fear and isolation. She makes you feel like you're the only one. She's done it to a dozen families over the years. But you're not alone, Lucas. "I have a piece of paper against her entire army," he said, the words heavy with resignation. Eleanor took a cookie, her expression thoughtful. "A piece of paper, yes. A legal, dated, and signed amendment. Something she told you was a clerical error. You know, the board doesn't always agree with her. She's just louder than everyone else. She steamrolls them. She's built her power by intimidation, not by law. You don't take on her army, Lucas. You take on her. You expose the lie, and you do it where it counts. At the next board meeting." The idea of a public confrontation was terrifying, but the alternative, losing his home and his dignity, was a far greater fear. "When is the next meeting?" "Tomorrow night," Eleanor said, a slight smile forming on her lips. "She won't have time to prepare for you. She'll be expecting you to back down, to pay the fine, or to get a lawyer. She won't expect you to bring the fight to her own turf." They spent the next day preparing. Eleanor provided him with a copy of the official board meeting agenda and a list of all the board members. Lucas spent hours meticulously highlighting every section of the bylaws, every contradiction, every piece of her deceit. He practiced his speech in front of the mirror, his voice shaking at first, then gaining a steady, resolute rhythm. He wasn't a public speaker. He wasn't a lawyer. He was just a homeowner who had been wronged, and now he was going to expose the person who wronged him. The community clubhouse was a bland, sterile building that smelled faintly of cheap cleaning supplies. The meeting room itself was a single, large chamber with a long conference table and a few rows of plastic chairs. Lucas arrived early and sat in the back, the crisp, printed documents in a manila folder on his lap. Carol swept in with the rest of the board members, an air of regal self-importance radiating from her. She was in a perfectly tailored pantsuit. her severe bob a flawless helmet of blonde hair. The board consisted of 5 people, 2 men Lucas didn't recognize, a woman with a kind but weary face named Brenda, a loud, imposing man named Mr. Peterson, and a quiet, unassuming woman in a sensible sweater. Carol took her place at the head of the table, a small smile of total control on her lips. She made eye contact with Lucas, and the smile tightened, a silent threat. The meeting began with mundane reports, the state of the landscaping, the budget for a new playground, a discussion about the annual community picnic. Lucas waited, his heart pounding a frantic drum solo against his ribs. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. This was it. This was the moment of truth. Finally, Carol said, "And now, under new business, we have a violation to address. A Mr. Lucas Davis of 2302 Whispering Pines has received a fine for failure to provide access to a shared community amenity. He has challenged the fine." A collective murmur rippled through the small crowd of residents. All eyes turned to him. Lucas stood up, his folder clutched in his hand. "Thank you, President Jenkins. I am challenging this fine on the grounds that it is based on a fraudulent claim. The rule you have cited, Section 7, Article D, Subsection 2, is outdated and has been superseded by an amendment passed 2 years ago." Carol held up a dismissive hand. "Mr. Davis, we've already discussed this. The amendment you're referring to was a clerical error and was never properly ratified. The copy on the website is a mistake." Lucas felt his blood run cold. She was using the exact same lie in front of the entire board and the community. He took a steadying breath. "That is incorrect. The amendment was ratified in a public meeting. It was signed by the full board, including yourself. The minutes of that meeting reflect its passing." He took a step forward, placing a copy of the printed amendment on the table. Carol's eyes flashed with anger. "That is a forged document," she hissed, leaning forward. "You are making serious accusations, Mr. Davis. I suggest you sit down before I have you removed." "No," Lucas said, his voice now a steady baritone, devoid of fear. "I have proof. My neighbor, Eleanor, has a copy of the ratified amendment. The Petersons, who you tried to fine for a satellite dish, have a copy. I've spoken to a dozen people in this community today who have proof that you have been issuing fines based on defunct bylaws. You have systematically taken advantage of people's trust for years, Ms. Jenkins. You have committed fraud." A shocked silence fell over the room. The murmuring stopped. Every face was turned toward Carol, then toward Lucas, then back again. Her face, a mask of righteous indignation moments before, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She looked like a cornered animal. "This is a ridiculous personal attack," she spat. "You have no proof of these claims. I've done nothing but serve this community. You are simply angry that you have to follow the rules like everyone else." "He's not lying," a voice from the table said, quiet but firm. All heads turned. It was Brenda, the woman with the weary, kind face. She sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her, her gaze fixed on Carol. "The amendment was ratified, Carol. We all signed it. I remember the meeting vividly. It was a long debate, but we agreed it was a fair compromise. To exempt private recreational amenities from the shared access rule, provided the homeowner maintained insurance." Carol's head snapped towards her. "Brenda, what are you doing? I told you that was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Carol. You told me it was a mistake," Brenda said, her voice rising slightly. "You told me you would fix the paperwork. You knew the whole time. Lucas is right. This fine is fraudulent." Carol stood up, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Her eyes darted from Brenda to the other board members. She had always relied on their silent obedience, their fear. But now she saw a flicker of doubt, a hint of questioning. Her army had a crack in the armor. Her face, a moment before a mask of fury, now contorted into a snarl of pure malice. "This is treason," she whispered, her voice a low, chilling threat that was meant only for Brenda. But in the silence of the room, everyone heard it, a single word that revealed not a president, but a dictator losing her grip on power. Lucas stood firm, holding his ground, watching as Carol's carefully constructed empire began to crumble, one quiet, treacherous word at a time. The single word, treason, hung in the sterile air of the meeting room like a shard of ice. It was a word that belonged in a medieval court, not a suburban community clubhouse, and it shattered the last vestiges of Carol's professional facade. The silence that followed was heavy and stunned, all eyes fixed on the two women at the conference table. Brenda sat placidly, her hands still folded, her face a serene counterpoint to Carol's contorted snarl. "Treason?" Brenda repeated, her voice perfectly calm. "No, Carol. It's not treason. It's the truth. We passed a motion. We voted on it. The minutes are on file." She looked at the rest of the board. "Are they not, Mr. Peterson?" The imposing man who sat opposite Brenda had a long, thoughtful face. He had watched the exchange with an unblinking intensity. He now leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "She's right, Carol. We all remember the discussion. I thought it was a stupid idea at the time, but the board voted, and we passed it unanimously. It was about not overstepping boundaries. We wanted to protect the integrity of private property." His eyes narrowed at Carol. "You said you'd file the updated version with the new clause. You never did." The crack in Carol's armor became a gaping fissure. "That's a lie. I filed it. The system must have rejected it. There must have been a clerical error. I have been nothing but transparent and diligent in my duties." Her voice was shrill now, losing the carefully controlled composure that had been her most potent weapon. "You have been anything but," another voice chimed in. It was the quiet, unassuming woman in the sensible sweater. "I was a dissenting vote on the initial motion because I felt it didn't go far enough to protect homeowners. But the motion was still passed. The fine is illegal." The room erupted. The murmuring that had been a low rumble now became a chorus of frustrated voices. A man from the back row stood up. "I'll be damned! She tried to fine me for my bird bath last year, said it was a structural hazard." A woman with fiery red hair rose from her seat. "The Jones family, she tried to fine them for the color of their front door, said it was a non-conforming shade of periwinkle. They had to repaint the whole damn thing. They had the letter from her to prove it." The floodgates had opened. Lucas stood frozen in the back, watching the scene unfold with a sense of awe. He had come here prepared to be a lone crusader, but instead, he had become the spark that lit a fire. The community wasn't just a collection of separate homeowners. It was a group of people who had been silenced for years, and now, finally, they had found their voice. Carol was no longer just standing. She was pacing, her hands gesturing wildly, her face a blotchy red. "This is a conspiracy! All of you are lying! You have no proof! The bylaws are clear! The bylaws are the rules!" "The bylaws are the rules," Lucas said, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "And the updated bylaws say my pool is exempt. You tried to fine me based on a lie, and you've done the same thing to my neighbors. Your reign of intimidation is over, Ms. Jenkins." The two other male board members, who had been silent up until this point, now looked at each other with a shared look of discomfort and dawning realization. The imposing Mr. Peterson, who seemed to have a deep-seated dislike of being made a fool, turned to Carol. "Carol, this is a serious accusation. You are directly contradicting two other board members. The copy of the bylaws on the website is your responsibility. This is more than a clerical error." "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence," Brenda said, her voice cutting and clear. She was no longer a quiet, kind-faced woman. She was a leader, taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of control. "We have heard multiple accounts of fraudulent fines. We have direct evidence of a board amendment being hidden. President Jenkins, I move that we vote on your immediate removal from the board." The room fell silent once more. This was not a vote about a pool. This was a vote for justice. This was the moment of truth. Carol stopped pacing. Her eyes filled with a desperate fury fixed on Brenda. "You can't do this, Brenda. This is a sham. A personal vendetta. I have done nothing wrong. I'm the president. I have control." "Your power comes from the trust of the community, Carol," Lucas said, feeling a surge of confidence. "And that trust is gone." Mr. Peterson, who looked more and more enraged by the minute, seconded the motion. "All in favor of removing Carol Jenkins as president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, please raise your hand." Brenda's hand went up. Mr. Peterson's hand went up. The quiet woman in the sweater raised her hand. The two other men hesitated for a moment, their eyes darting between Carol's menacing glare and the sea of angry faces in the crowd. They had to choose. They had to decide between the tyrant and the truth. One hand went up, then the other. A majority. A collective sigh of relief and a few whispered cheers rippled through the room. Carol's face, which had been a mask of fury, now went completely slack. The color drained from it, leaving a pale, ghostly canvas of a woman who had just lost everything. She looked at Lucas, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of pure, unadulterated fear in her eyes. It was the fear of a person who had always been in control, now standing on the precipice of total defeat. The silence was absolute. Everyone was waiting for her reaction. She picked up her tablet and her purse, her movements stiff and mechanical, like a doll being controlled by unseen strings. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked to the door, her back ramrod straight. And without a single word, she walked out of the room, leaving her shattered empire behind. She had started a war over a pool, and she had just been decisively, publicly, and utterly defeated. And the best part? She had done it to herself. Her own lies, her own pride, had been her downfall. Lucas looked at the board, then at the community, and for the first time in weeks, he looked back at his house, at the glimmer of his pool, and knew that his dream, finally, was truly safe. The walk home felt different, lighter. The oppressive humidity that had weighed down the air for days seemed to have lifted. Lucas didn't just walk, he glided, the victory still buzzing in his veins like a low, satisfying hum. He had faced the dragon in its lair, and he had not only survived, he had conquered. The community meeting, a scene of public humiliation for Carol, now replayed in his mind like a triumphant cinematic montage. Her face, a mask of pure, unadulterated fear, was the final, perfect punctuation mark. He had brought down the queen. Eleanor was waiting for him at her porch, a wide, genuine smile on her face. "You did it, Lucas. I knew you could." "We did it," he corrected, feeling a profound sense of camaraderie. "Without you, I would have just paid the fine and left. You gave me the courage. You gave them a voice," she said, her eyes twinkling. "A lot of people wanted to do what you did, but nobody had the guts. She made sure of that. You were the first, and I have a feeling you won't be the last." She handed him another plate of cookies, still warm from the oven. "Go on, celebrate, you deserve it. I have a feeling we won't be hearing from Carol Jenkins again." Eleanor's words felt like a prophecy. Over the next few days, a sense of quiet normalcy returned to Lucas's life. The certified mail stopped coming. The daily penalties were no longer accruing. His mailbox, once a source of dread, was now filled with nothing but junk mail and catalogs. A few neighbors, people he hadn't even met, waved at him from their cars, offering small, grateful smiles. One man stopped by and simply said, Thank you. His pool, once a source of anxiety, was now a pure, unadulterated joy. He spent hours in the cool, crystal-clear water, the sun on his face, the sound of the world around him a muted, distant hum. He was truly home. The dream he had bought was finally a reality. The nightmare was over. A week after the meeting, an email arrived from Brenda, the new interim president. The subject line was, Update HOA bylaw compliance. Lucas opened it, his heart still, for a brief second, thumping with a residual fear. But the email was a simple, professional message. The fine had been officially rescinded, and a copy of the amended bylaw had been uploaded to the HOA portal. She even attached a copy of the meeting minutes for good measure. Lucas deleted the file from his desktop and felt a deep, cleansing sense of relief wash over him. He was finally free. The phone rang 2 days later, just as Lucas was finishing a project proposal. The screen showed his boss, a man named Marcus with a no-nonsense voice and a mind like a steel trap. Lucas answered, expecting a routine question about the project. Lucas, we have a problem. Marcus's voice was clipped, devoid of his usual dry humor. A problem? What kind of problem? The proposal is on track. Not with the proposal. With you. A complaint was just filed with the board. It's comprehensive. It claims you misrepresented your experience on your resume, that you have a history of unprofessional conduct with clients, and that you've been using company resources for personal projects. It's got dates, names, even copies of what appear to be fabricated emails. Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. The triumph, the peace, the sense of security he had built over the last week, it all vanished in a single, cold second. What? That's insane. I've never done any of that. I know, Marcus said, his voice now laced with a weary frustration. Your record here is spotless. But this document, it's meticulous. It names specific projects from 3 years ago, projects you were never even on. It mentions a client you've never worked with. It has a timeline of your supposed unethical behavior. It's a work of fiction, but it's a detailed one. And it's signed by a Carol Jenkins, claiming to be a concerned citizen and a former colleague. Lucas's mind raced. Carol. It had to be Carol. But how could she do this? She didn't know him. She didn't know his work. She was just a woman with a grudge and too much time on her hands. She's not a former colleague. I don't even know her. She's the former president of my HOA. I recently exposed her for fraud and had her removed from her position. This is her revenge. I figured it was something like that, Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. But Lucas, this is serious. This complaint was filed directly with the head of the company, and they've already launched an investigation. They're talking about putting you on temporary leave until this is sorted out. I'm doing everything I can, but the allegations they're just so specific. They've even attached what looks like a doctored invoice from our servers. This person knows what they're doing. They're trying to ruin you. The word hung in the air. Ruin. It was a more powerful, more terrifying word than lien. A lien was a threat against his property. This was a threat against his livelihood, his professional reputation, the very foundation of his identity. Carol hadn't just been humiliated at the meeting, she had been transformed. She was no longer a petty bureaucrat fighting over a bylaw. She was a master strategist, a meticulous plotter, a person who had chosen to escalate the battle from a community dispute to a campaign of personal, professional destruction. Lucas hung up the phone, his hand trembling. He walked to the mirror in his office and stared at his reflection. The man he saw was no longer a homeowner who had won a fight. He was a man with a target on his back, a man who had underestimated his enemy. He had thought the war was over. He had been so sure that justice had been served. He had celebrated his victory, but as he looked at his face in the mirror, he saw the truth. He hadn't won. The battle for the pool was just the opening salvo. The real war, a far more dangerous, personal and brutal war, had just begun.